Marcus Chen pushed his mop bucket down the long hallway of the Meridian Conservatory of Music. The wheels squeaked against the polished marble floor. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning and the building was quiet. This was his favorite time to work. No students rushing past him. No teachers asking him to move his cleaning cart. Just him and the music that floated through the walls. He had been working at the conservatory for 3 years now. Every morning he arrived before sunrise. Every evening he left after the last student went home. In between, he cleaned practice rooms, emptied trash cans, and mopped endless hallways. It was not the life he had dreamed of, but it paid the bills. Marcus stopped outside practice room 7. Through the door, he could hear someone playing piano. The music was beautiful but sad. The student was working on the same piece for weeks now. Marcus knew because he listened every day. The piece was called Ballade No. 1 in G minor by a composer named Chopin. He had looked it up online. The music stopped suddenly. Then it started again from the beginning. The student was having trouble with a difficult part. Marcus could hear the mistakes. Not because he was a trained musician, but because he had heard the piece so many times. He knew how it should sound. Marcus continued down the hall. He passed practice room 12, where a violinist was working on scales. Then practice room 15, where someone was singing in a language he did not understand. The conservatory was full of talented young people. They came from wealthy families. They had private teachers since they were children. They spoke about music in ways Marcus could never understand. But Marcus loved music more than anything else in the world. He had always loved music, even as a child growing up in a small apartment with his parents and 2 brothers. His family did not have money for music lessons. They barely had money for food and rent. But Marcus would sit by the radio for hours, listening to classical music on the public radio station. His mother would find him there, eyes closed, completely lost in the sounds. When Marcus was 12, his school got an old piano. It was donated by someone who did not want it anymore. The piano was out of tune and missing some keys, but Marcus loved it. During lunch breaks, he would sneak into the music room and press the keys. He did not know how to read music, but he could pick out simple melodies by ear. The music teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, found him there one day. Instead of getting angry, she smiled. She showed him where middle C was located. She taught him how to hold his hands. For 3 months, she gave him free lessons during lunch. Then the school got a new principal. The new principal said the old piano took up too much space. They threw it away. Marcus never forgot those 3 months. Even now, 22 years later, he could remember the feeling of the keys under his fingers. He could remember Mrs. Rodriguez telling him he had good ears for music. After high school, Marcus got a job at a factory. Then he worked at a restaurant. Then he delivered packages for a shipping company. He moved from job to job, but he never stopped loving music. In his tiny studio apartment, he had an old radio. Every night after work, he would listen to classical music until he fell asleep. 2 years ago, everything changed. Marcus met Sarah at a coffee shop near his apartment. She was a nurse at the local hospital. She had kind eyes and a warm smile. They started talking about music. Sarah played guitar as a hobby. She was not a professional, but she understood Marcus's love for classical music. 6 months later, they got married. Sarah encouraged Marcus to follow his dreams. She bought him a small electric keyboard for his birthday. It was not expensive, but it was the most wonderful gift Marcus had ever received. "You should learn to play," Sarah told him. "You talk about music all the time." "Why not try?" Marcus was scared. He was 34 years old. Most musicians started when they were children. How could he compete with people who had been playing for 20 years? But Sarah believed in him. She found piano tutorial videos online. She bought him beginner music books from the library's used book sale. Every night after work, Marcus practiced on his keyboard. He started with simple songs. "Mary Had a Little Lamb," "Happy Birthday," "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." His fingers were clumsy at first. The music sounded choppy and uncertain, but slowly, day by day, he got better. After 6 months, Marcus could play easy classical pieces. After a year, he was working on intermediate music. The keyboard only had 61 keys, not the full 88 keys of a real piano, but Marcus made it work. He learned to transpose difficult parts to fit his smaller instrument. Working at the conservatory was both a blessing and a curse. Every day, Marcus heard incredible music. The students practiced pieces that made his heart soar. But every day he was reminded that he was just the janitor. Students walked past him without seeing him. Teachers treated him politely but distantly. He was invisible to the music world he loved so much. Sometimes, late at night when the building was empty, Marcus would sneak into one of the practice rooms. He would sit at a real piano and play quietly. The touch was so different from his electric keyboard. The real piano responded to every small movement of his fingers. Soft notes were like whispers. Loud notes were like thunder. It was magical. Marcus always made sure to leave everything exactly as he found it. He would never want to get in trouble or lose his job. The conservatory was the closest he could get to the music world. Even if he was just cleaning it, he was still part of it somehow. One evening, as Marcus was emptying the trash in the main lobby, he overheard two students talking. "Did you hear about the auditions?" One student asked. "What auditions?" The other replied, "For the annual benefit concert. They're opening it up to local musicians this year, not just conservatory students." Marcus stopped what he was doing. He pretended to be focused on his work, but he was listening carefully. "Really? Anyone can audition?" "That's what the poster says. They want to showcase local talent alongside our students. The director thinks it will bring more community support." Marcus's heart started beating faster. Could this be his chance? Could he actually audition to perform at the conservatory? It seemed impossible. But maybe, just maybe, it was possible. That night, Marcus went home and told Sarah what he had heard. Her eyes lit up with excitement. "You have to audition," she said immediately. "I can't," Marcus replied. "I'm just a janitor. I don't have formal training. I would embarrass myself." "Marcus," Sarah said, taking his hands in hers, "you play beautifully. You've been working so hard. This is your chance." Marcus looked at his electric keyboard in the corner of their small apartment. He thought about all the hours he had spent practicing. He thought about his love for music. He thought about his dream of playing for an audience. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe this was his chance. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work with new purpose. He would find out more about these auditions. He would see if someone like him could really try. As he pushed his mop bucket down the familiar hallway, Marcus hummed quietly to himself. It was the melody from Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the same piece he heard the student practicing every day. The same piece he had been secretly learning on his keyboard at home. Maybe it was time to stop hiding his music. Maybe it was time to let the world hear what he could do. Marcus spent the next 3 days looking for information about the auditions. He checked bulletin boards in the hallways. He listened to student conversations. He even asked Mrs. Patterson, the secretary, if she knew anything about it. "Oh yes," Mrs. Patterson said, looking up from her computer. "Director Petrov announced it last week. It's part of our community outreach program. We want to show that classical music is for everyone, not just conservatory students." Marcus nodded politely, but his stomach was full of butterflies. Director Vladimir Petrov was the most important person at the conservatory. He was famous throughout the city for his work with young musicians. He had trained students who now performed with major orchestras around the world. He was also known for being very strict and demanding. "Where can I find more information?" Marcus asked carefully. Mrs. Patterson looked at him with surprise. "Are you interested in auditioning, Marcus?" Marcus felt his face turn red. "Maybe. I play a little piano." "How wonderful." Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly. "The poster is on the main bulletin board near the auditorium. Auditions are next Friday at 2 p.m. Each person gets 5 minutes to perform." Marcus thanked her and walked quickly to the bulletin board. There it was, a bright yellow poster with bold black letters. Annual benefit concert. Open auditions seeking local musicians to perform alongside conservatory students. Friday, March 15th, 2 p.m. auditorium. Prepare one classical piece. Maximum 5 minutes, all skill levels welcome. At the bottom of the poster was a smaller line that made Marcus's heart race. Performances will be judged by director Vladimir Petrov and the conservatory faculty. Marcus stared at the poster for a long time. Other people walked past him in the hallway, but he did not notice them. 5 minutes. He had 5 minutes to prove himself. 5 minutes to show that a janitor could make beautiful music. But what piece should he play? He knew many songs now, but most of them were simple. For an audition this important, he needed something impressive, something that would show his skill and his love for music. That evening, Marcus sat at his keyboard with Sarah beside him. They made a list of all the pieces he could play well. What about that Bach piece you've been working on? Sarah suggested. Marcus played a few measures of Bach's Invention No. 1. It was clean and precise, but it felt too simple for such an important audition. Or the Mozart Sonata. Marcus tried the Mozart, but it did not feel right either. Too light and cheerful for what he was feeling inside. Then Marcus thought about the piece he heard every morning from Practice Room 7, the Chopin Ballade. For months he had been listening to the student struggle with it. For months he had been learning it secretly on his own keyboard. What about the Chopin? He said quietly. Sarah looked at him with wide eyes. That's a very difficult piece, Marcus. Are you sure you're ready for something that challenging? Marcus was not sure about anything. But when he thought about the Chopin Ballade, his heart started beating faster. Not from fear, but from excitement. The piece was like a story told through music. It started gently, like someone whispering a secret. Then it grew more intense, full of passion and drama. Finally, it ended with power and triumph. Marcus had been playing parts of it for weeks, but never the whole thing. His electric keyboard could not handle all the complex parts. Some sections needed the full range of a real piano, but he knew the music by heart. He could hear every note in his mind. I want to try, Marcus said. Even if I'm not perfect, I want to try. Sarah squeezed his hand. Then let's make sure you're as ready as possible. For the next week, Marcus practiced like never before. He woke up an hour earlier each morning to practice before work. During his lunch break, he watched videos of famous pianists playing the Chopin Ballade. After work, he practiced until his neighbors complained about the noise. The hardest part was practicing without hearing the full sound. His electric keyboard could only approximate the rich tones of a real piano. Marcus had to use his imagination to fill in the missing sounds. He closed his eyes and remembered the times he had heard the piece played on the conservatory's grand pianos. On Wednesday, 2 days before the audition, something unexpected happened. Marcus was cleaning Practice Room 7 when he noticed the student who usually practiced there was not around. The room was empty and the grand piano sat silent. Marcus looked around carefully. The hallway was quiet. No one was nearby. He set down his cleaning supplies and walked to the piano bench. His hands were shaking as he lifted the piano lid. This was his chance to practice the Chopin Ballade on a real piano. Just once, just to hear how it really sounded. Marcus sat down and placed his fingers on the keys. The touch was completely different from his electric keyboard. The keys were heavier, more responsive. When he pressed them gently, the sound was like silk. When he pressed them firmly, the sound filled the entire room. He started the opening of the ballade very quietly. The melody was so beautiful on a real piano. Each note had depth and color that his keyboard could never produce. Marcus felt tears in his eyes as he played. This was what music was supposed to sound like. He worked through the piece carefully, section by section. There were parts he had never heard properly before. Parts that his keyboard could not play correctly. Now on the real piano, everything made sense. The music told its story the way Chopin had intended. Marcus was so focused on the music that he did not hear footsteps in the hallway. He did not notice someone stopping outside the practice room door. He was completely lost in the Chopin Ballade, playing with more emotion and skill than he had ever played before. When he finished the piece, Marcus sat quietly for a moment. His heart was pounding. He had never played anything so beautifully in his life. For those few minutes, he had not been a janitor. He had been a pianist. That was remarkable. Marcus jumped and turned around. Standing in the doorway was a young woman with a violin case. She was one of the conservatory students. Marcus recognized her but had never spoken to her before. I'm sorry, Marcus said quickly, standing up from the piano bench. I was cleaning and... Please don't apologize, the student said, walking into the room. That was the most beautiful performance of the Chopin Ballade I've ever heard. I'm Elena, by the way. Marcus, he replied, still feeling embarrassed about being caught. Are you auditioning on Friday? Elena asked. Marcus nodded nervously. Good, Elena said with a smile. The conservatory needs more musicians like you. Musicians who play with real feeling, not just technical skill. After Elena left, Marcus finished his cleaning quickly and went home. He told Sarah about what had happened, about playing on the real piano, about being heard by a conservatory student. She said it was beautiful, Marcus told Sarah. A real music student said my playing was beautiful. Because it is beautiful, Sarah replied. You have a gift, Marcus. On Friday, you need to share that gift with everyone. The next day, Thursday, Marcus could barely concentrate on his work. Tomorrow was the audition. Tomorrow he would sit at a grand piano in front of Director Petrov and the conservatory faculty. Tomorrow he would have 5 minutes to prove that music belonged to everyone, not just the wealthy and formally trained. As Marcus worked, he noticed more students than usual talking about the auditions. The benefit concert was a big event for the conservatory. It raised money for scholarships and new instruments. This year, with local musicians included, there was extra excitement. Marcus overheard some students discussing who might audition from the community. I heard there's a piano teacher from the elementary school, one student said, and a violinist who plays in restaurants, said another. Probably just amateur stuff, a third student commented dismissively. Nothing like what we do here. Marcus felt his confidence drop. These students had been training their whole lives. They practiced for hours every day with professional teachers. What made him think he could compete with them? That evening, Marcus sat at his keyboard but could not bring himself to practice. His hands felt heavy. His mind was full of doubt. What if I embarrass myself? He asked Sarah. What if I forget the music? What if my hands shake too much to play? Sarah sat beside him on the piano bench. Marcus, do you remember why you started playing music? Because I love it, Marcus answered. Exactly. Not because you wanted to impress anyone. Not because you wanted to be famous. Because music makes you happy. Tomorrow, just share that happiness. Let people hear how much you love music. Sarah was right. Marcus had started playing because music filled something empty inside him. When he played, he felt complete. When he played, he felt like himself. Besides, Sarah added with a mischievous smile, you've been practicing that Chopin piece for months. You probably know it better than some of the conservatory students. Marcus laughed for the first time all day. He placed his hands on the keyboard and began to play. Not to practice for the audition. Not to impress anyone. Just to make music because he loved it. As the familiar melody of the Chopin ballad filled their small apartment, Marcus felt his confidence returning. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not. But tonight he would simply play music and remember why he loved it so much. Outside their window, the city was full of noise and activity. Friday morning arrived gray and rainy. Marcus woke up before his alarm clock, his stomach tight with nerves. The audition was in 8 hours. 8 hours until he would either fulfill his biggest dream or face his worst fear. He tried to eat breakfast, but the food tasted like cardboard. Sarah made his favorite coffee, but even that could not calm his racing heart. Every few minutes, Marcus would start to say something, then stop. The words would not come. Maybe I should not go, Marcus finally said as he got ready for work. Maybe this is a mistake. Sarah looked at him in the mirror as he struggled to tie his work uniform. His hands were shaking slightly. Marcus, she said gently, what's the worst thing that could happen? I could embarrass myself in front of everyone. I could prove that I don't belong in the music world. And what's the best thing that could happen? Marcus thought for a moment. I could play well. I could show that music is for everyone. Then you have to try, Sarah said. Because the regret of not trying would be worse than any embarrassment. Marcus knew she was right, but knowing and feeling were different things. As he walked to work through the rain, every step felt heavy. By the time he reached the conservatory, his work uniform was damp and his confidence was even lower. The building felt different that morning. There was extra energy in the air. Students were talking excitedly about the auditions. Faculty members were setting up chairs in the auditorium. Even Mrs. Patterson seemed more busy than usual, answering phones and organizing paperwork. Marcus tried to focus on his regular work, but his mind kept wandering. As he mopped the floors, he could hear students practicing for their own auditions. From practice room 3 came the sound of a violin playing something fast and complicated. From practice room 8, a soprano was warming up her voice with scales that seemed to go on forever. Around 10 a.m., Marcus was cleaning near the auditorium when he saw Director Petrov for the first time that day. The director was a tall, thin man with gray hair and sharp eyes. He wore an expensive dark suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. Marcus had seen him many times before, but always from a distance. Today, the director seemed more intimidating than ever. Marcus ducked into a supply closet until Director Petrov passed by. How could he possibly perform in front of such an important person? Director Petrov had heard some of the best musicians in the world. What would he think of a janitor trying to play classical music? At lunchtime, Marcus could not eat. Instead, he walked around the building trying to calm his nerves. He ended up in the basement where old instruments and music stands were stored. It was quiet down there, away from all the excitement upstairs. As Marcus sat on an old crate surrounded by forgotten music equipment, he thought about his journey to this moment. 3 years of listening to students practice while he cleaned, 2 years of teaching himself piano on his small keyboard, months of dreaming about playing for an audience. He thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, his middle school music teacher, who had given him his first piano lessons. He thought about his parents who had supported his love of music even though they could not afford lessons. He thought about Sarah, who believed in him when he could not believe in himself. Suddenly, Marcus heard footsteps on the stairs. Someone was coming down to the basement. Marcus quickly stood up, pretending to be working. A moment later, Elena, the violin student who had heard him practice, appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "Oh, hi, Marcus," she said with surprise. "What are you doing down here?" "Just checking on some equipment," Marcus lied. Elena looked at him carefully. "Are you okay? You look nervous." Marcus hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I'm scared about the audition this afternoon." "Why?" "You play beautifully. I heard you the other day, remember? That was different. That was just me practicing alone. This afternoon there will be judges and an audience. What if I mess up? What if everyone realizes I don't belong here?" Elena sat down on a dusty chair. "Can I tell you something? I've been at this conservatory for 4 years. I've heard hundreds of students play. Most of them are technically perfect, but they're missing something important. What's that? Soul, passion. The thing that makes music matter. When I heard you play the other day, you had all of that. You played like the music was part of you." Marcus felt a little better, but he was still scared. "What if I forget the notes? What if my hands shake too much?" "Then you'll be human," Elena said with a smile. "Marcus, do you know why I chose the violin?" Marcus shook his head. "Because when I was 6 years old, my grandmother took me to hear a street musician playing violin outside a grocery store. He was probably not a great musician by conservatory standards. His clothes were old and his violin was scratched and worn. But when he played, I felt something magic. The music made me happy in a way I had never felt before." Elena stood up and walked toward the stairs. "That street musician changed my life, Marcus. Not because he was perfect, but because he shared his love of music with everyone who would listen. That's what you're going to do this afternoon." After Elena left, Marcus felt calmer. He thought about what she had said. Music was not about being perfect. It was about sharing something beautiful with other people. Marcus spent the rest of his lunch break in the basement, quietly practicing the Chopin Ballade on an imaginary piano. He moved his fingers through the air, hearing each note in his mind. His hands began to feel more relaxed. When he returned to work, Marcus noticed something he had missed before. On the bulletin board near the auditorium, someone had posted a new notice. It was a newspaper clipping from last year's benefit concert. The headline read, "Local musicians shine alongside conservatory stars." Marcus read the article carefully. It talked about how including community musicians had made the concert more meaningful. One quote from Director Petrov stood out, "Music belongs to everyone. When we open our doors to the community, we remind ourselves why we fell in love with music in the first place." Reading those words, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Maybe Director Petrov was not just looking for technical perfection. Maybe he was looking for musicians who truly loved what they were doing. As the afternoon approached, Marcus began to feel excited along with his nervousness. This was his chance to show what he had learned. This was his chance to prove that music could come from anywhere, even from a janitor who practiced on an old keyboard in a tiny apartment. At 1:30 p.m., Marcus clocked out of work early. Mrs. Patterson had given him permission to leave for the audition. In the staff bathroom, he changed out of his work uniform and into his best clothes. The suit was not expensive, but Sarah had ironed it carefully that morning. His shoes were old but polished. He looked at himself in the mirror and tried to see a musician instead of a janitor. Marcus walked slowly to the auditorium. Students and faculty members were gathered outside, chatting and waiting for the auditions to begin. Marcus felt out of place among them, but he reminded himself of Elena's words. He was here to share his love of music. Through the auditorium windows, Marcus could see the grand piano on stage. It was the same type of piano he had practiced on in the empty classroom, but somehow it looked bigger and more intimidating under the stage lights. In a few minutes, he would be sitting at that piano, playing for the most important audience of his life. A few other community musicians had arrived for auditions. Marcus recognized the elementary school piano teacher that students had mentioned. There was also an older man with a cello case and a woman carrying sheet music. They all looked more confident than Marcus felt. At exactly 2 p.m., Director Petrov appeared and called everyone into the auditorium. Marcus's heart was beating so fast he was sure everyone could hear it. His palms were sweaty and his mouth felt dry. But he walked into the auditorium with the other musicians. The auditorium was smaller than Marcus had expected, but it still felt huge. There were about 50 seats with conservatory students and faculty scattered throughout. At the front, Director Petrov and 2 other judges sat behind a table with papers and pencils. "Welcome, everyone," Director Petrov said in a deep, clear voice. "We're excited to hear what our community has to offer. Each performer will have 5 minutes. We'll call you in alphabetical order by last name." Marcus's last name started with C, so he would be among the first to perform. His stomach dropped as he realized he would not have time to watch other performers and calm his nerves. The first performer was a cellist named Mr. Anderson. He played a piece by Bach with steady, reliable technique. The judges nodded politely and took notes. When he finished, there was respectful applause. Next was Mrs. Chen, the elementary school piano teacher. She played a Mozart sonata cleanly and precisely. Again, polite applause and note-taking from the judges. "Marcus Chen," Director Petrov called. This was it. Marcus stood up on shaky legs and walked toward the stage. Every step felt like it took forever. The auditorium was completely quiet, except for the sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor. As Marcus climbed the steps to the stage, he could feel everyone watching him. Some of the conservatory students looked curious. Others looked skeptical. A few were whispering to each other. Marcus tried not to look at them directly. He reached the piano and sat down on the bench. Marcus sat at the grand piano, his hands hovering over the keys. The auditorium was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. 50 pairs of eyes were watching him. 50 people waiting to see what the janitor could do. He looked out at the audience one more time. In the 3rd row, he spotted Elena, the violin student who had encouraged him. She gave him a small smile and a tiny nod. That simple gesture helped Marcus feel a little less alone. Director Petrov cleared his throat. "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Chen." Marcus took one final deep breath. He thought about the piece he was about to play. Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, a piece that told a story of hope and struggle, of quiet moments and powerful emotions, a piece that had become part of his soul over the past months. His hands found their position on the keys. The opening of the ballade was soft and gentle, like someone beginning to tell an important story. Marcus pressed the first notes and the sound filled the auditorium. The piano responded beautifully to his touch. Each note was clear and warm. Marcus had practiced this opening hundreds of times on his electric keyboard, but hearing it on a real grand piano was like seeing color for the first time. The instrument seemed to understand exactly what he wanted to express. As Marcus played the opening melody, something unexpected happened. His nervousness began to fade away. The audience disappeared from his awareness. The judges and their notebooks became unimportant. There was only Marcus and the music and the story he was telling through the keys. The ballad's first section was like a conversation between different voices. Marcus's left hand played a gentle accompaniment, while his right hand sang the main melody. He had learned to make these voices distinct during his months of practice. On this grand piano, the effect was even more beautiful than he had imagined. From the audience, Marcus could hear the subtle sounds of people leaning forward in their seats. Someone's program rustled. A chair creaked slightly. But these sounds did not distract him. If anything, they told him that people were listening carefully. Director Petrov had stopped taking notes. His pen was still in his hand, but he was watching Marcus with focused attention. The director's expression had changed from polite interest to something more serious. He was hearing something he had not expected. The other judges were also paying close attention. Professor Williams, who taught advanced piano at the conservatory, was nodding slightly with the music. Professor Martinez, the composition teacher, had put down her pen entirely and was simply listening. As the first section of the ballade ended, Marcus transitioned into the second theme. This part of the music was different from the opening. Where the first melody had been gentle and questioning, this new theme was more confident and flowing. Marcus's fingers moved smoothly across the keys, creating long lines of melody that seemed to float above the accompaniment. In the audience, several conservatory students were looking surprised. They had expected amateur-level playing from a community musician. Instead, they were hearing something much more sophisticated. Marcus's technique was not perfect by conservatory standards, but his musical understanding was remarkably deep. Elena was smiling broadly. She had known Marcus could play well, but even she was surprised by how confident and expressive he sounded on the big stage. This was not the nervous janitor she had talked to in the basement. This was a musician sharing something important with his audience. As Marcus continued playing, his confidence grew stronger. He could feel that the music was working. The audience was with him. The piano was responding to every small change in his touch. The story of the ballad was unfolding exactly as he had imagined it during all those hours of practice. The middle section of the piece was the most challenging part. The music became more complex, with rapid passages in both hands and complicated rhythms. Marcus had worried about this section the most during his preparation. On his electric keyboard, some of these passages had never sounded quite right, but now on the grand piano everything fell into place. The difficult passages felt natural under his fingers. The complex rhythms locked together perfectly. Marcus played with a fluidity that surprised even himself. All those months of careful practice had prepared him better than he had realized. Director Petrov was now leaning forward in his chair. As someone who had heard thousands of auditions over his career, he could recognize something special when he heard it. This community musician was not just playing notes correctly. He was interpreting the music with real understanding and personal expression. The ballade reached its climactic section, where Chopin had written some of the most passionate and dramatic music of the entire piece. Marcus felt every emotion as he played. The music surged with power and intensity. His whole body was involved in creating the sound, not just his fingers. The piano sang out with a richness and depth that filled every corner of the auditorium. Some members of the audience had stopped breathing. The music was so intense and beautiful that they did not want to miss a single note. Marcus was taking them on a journey through the emotions of the piece, and they were completely absorbed in the experience. As the climax faded, Marcus transitioned into the final section of the ballade. This part returned to the gentle character of the opening, but with a new sense of wisdom and resolution. It was like ending a story where the narrator had learned something important through their struggles. Marcus played these final pages with particular tenderness. After all the drama and excitement of the middle sections, this ending felt like a peaceful conversation with an old friend. His touch on the keys was light and careful, bringing out every small detail of Chopin's writing. The very last measures of the piece were the most difficult part for Marcus emotionally. He knew that in a few seconds the music would be over. His moment on stage would end. He would have to return to being just the janitor, while the conservatory students would continue with their privileged musical education. But as Marcus played the final notes, he realized something important. For these 5 minutes he had not been just anything. He had been a musician, sharing beautiful music with people who appreciated it. No one could take that away from him regardless of what happened next. The last note of the ballade faded into silence. Marcus lifted his hands from the keys and sat quietly for a moment. The auditorium was completely still. No one moved or made a sound. Marcus looked up at the audience. Every face was focused on him. Director Petrov was staring with an expression of amazement. Professor Williams was shaking her head slowly, as if she could not believe what she had just heard. Professor Martinez had tears in her eyes. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Marcus began to worry that something was wrong. Had he made a terrible mistake? Had his playing been worse than he thought? Then Elena started clapping. Her applause broke the spell that had fallen over the auditorium. Suddenly everyone was clapping. Not the polite, respectful applause that had followed the previous performers. This was genuine, enthusiastic applause. Several students were on their feet. Professor Williams was clapping with her hands raised high. Even Director Petrov, who was known for his reserved demeanor, was applauding with obvious appreciation. Marcus sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. He had hoped to play well enough not to embarrass himself. He had never imagined that conservatory students and faculty would respond to his playing with such enthusiasm. Director Petrov stood up and raised his hand for quiet. The applause gradually faded. "Thank you, Mr. Chen," the director said. His voice sounded different than it had before. Warmer, more personal. That was a truly remarkable performance. Marcus stood up from the piano bench, his legs still a bit shaky. "Thank you, sir. We'll be in touch with all performers by Monday," Director Petrov continued. "But I want you to know that your interpretation of the Chopin was exceptional." "Where did you study piano?" This was the question Marcus had been dreading. He could feel the entire auditorium waiting for his answer. He thought about lying, about making up some story about private lessons or music school. But Elena's words from the basement came back to him. He was here to share his truth, not to pretend to be someone else. "I taught myself, sir," Marcus said quietly. "I've been learning from books and videos for about 2 years." A murmur went through the audience. Several students looked at each other with surprise. Self-taught musicians were rare at this level of classical music performance. Director Petrov's eyebrows rose slightly. "Self-taught? That's quite remarkable, Mr. Chen. You show exceptional musical instincts." "Thank you, sir." "How do you support yourself while pursuing music?" This was the moment Marcus had feared most. He could feel his face getting hot. Everyone was waiting for his answer. "I work here at the conservatory, sir. I'm a custodian." The murmur in the audience grew louder. Marcus heard someone whisper, "He's the janitor." Another voice said, "That's impossible." But Director Petrov's expression did not change. If anything, he looked more interested than before. "You work here?" the director asked. "So you've been surrounded by music every day while developing your skills?" "Yes, sir. I listen to the students practice while I work. It's been like having hundreds of free lessons." Director Petrov smiled for the first time that afternoon. "What a unique way to learn. No wonder your musicality is so well developed." The weekend passed slowly for Marcus. He tried to stay busy, but his mind kept returning to Friday's audition. He had done well. He knew that. The applause had been real. Director Petrov's compliments had been sincere. But Marcus also knew that playing well in an audition was different from being chosen for the actual concert. Sarah tried to keep his spirits up. "You were amazing," she told him repeatedly. "Whatever happens, you should be proud of yourself." Marcus was proud, but he was also nervous about returning to work on Monday. Word had spread quickly through the conservatory about the janitor who could play piano. Marcus wondered how people would treat him now. Would they see him differently? Would some people think he had been pretending to be something he was not? Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Marcus walked to work earlier than usual, hoping to avoid running into too many people. But as soon as he entered the building, Mrs. Patterson called out to him. "Marcus, how wonderful. I heard you were spectacular on Friday." Other staff members gathered around asking questions about the audition. Everyone seemed genuinely happy for him. Marcus felt relieved that people were being supportive rather than jealous or suspicious. As Marcus began his morning cleaning routine, he noticed that students and faculty were treating him differently. Not badly, but differently. Some students who had never acknowledged him before now smiled and said hello. A few professors nodded at him with what looked like respect, but Marcus also noticed some other reactions. A group of advanced students stopped talking when he walked past them in the hallway. He heard whispers and saw pointing. Not everyone seemed comfortable with the idea that their janitor was also a musician. Around 10 a.m., as Marcus was cleaning practice room 12, he overheard a conversation that made his stomach tighten. "Can you believe they're actually considering him for the concert?" one student was saying. "It's ridiculous," another replied. "This is supposed to be a prestigious event. What will people think when they see a janitor on stage with us? I heard he's self-taught. How can someone without proper training perform at our level? It's just a publicity stunt. The administration wants to look like they care about the community." Marcus continued cleaning, pretending not to hear, but the words stung. He had known that some people would react this way, but hearing it directly was painful. These students worked hard for their music education. They had spent years and thousands of dollars developing their skills. To them, Marcus probably seemed like someone trying to take a shortcut. Later that morning, Marcus was cleaning the main hallway when he saw a familiar figure approaching. It was James Morrison, one of the most talented piano students at the conservatory. James came from a wealthy family and had been studying piano since he was 4 years old. He was known for his technical perfection and his arrogant attitude. "So you're the famous janitor pianist?" James said, stopping directly in front of Marcus's cleaning cart. "Just Marcus," Marcus replied quietly, continuing to mop. "I heard your little performance on Friday. Impressive for someone with no training." Marcus looked up. James's tone was polite, but there was something cold in his eyes. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "Of course, technique isn't everything in music. There's also the matter of interpretation, musical education, understanding of style, things that take years of formal study to develop properly." "I'm sure you're right," Marcus replied, not wanting to get into an argument. "I've been playing that Chopin Ballade since I was 14. My teacher spent months helping me understand its historical context, its place in Chopin's development as a composer, the proper way to phrase each section. It's not enough to just play the notes, you know." Marcus nodded, but he felt his confidence shrinking. James was probably right. Marcus had learned the piece by listening and feeling, not through years of formal study. Maybe he really was out of his league. "Well, good luck," James said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I'm sure you'll do your best." As James walked away, Marcus felt the excitement of Friday's audition fading. The reality of his situation was settling in. He was surrounded by people who had dedicated their entire lives to music, people who had advantages he could never have, people who belonged in the classical music world in a way that he never would. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Marcus went through his cleaning routine mechanically, his mind heavy with doubt. By lunchtime, he was wondering if he should withdraw from consideration for the concert. Maybe it would be better to quit while he was ahead, before he embarrassed himself in front of a larger audience. As Marcus sat alone in the staff break room, eating his sandwich, Elena appeared in the doorway. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from him. Elena sat down with her own lunch. "I heard James Morrison cornered you this morning," she said. Marcus looked up, surprised. "How did you hear about that?" "This place is smaller than it seems. Word gets around quickly." Elena unwrapped her sandwich. "What did he say to you?" Marcus hesitated, then decided to be honest. He made some good points about formal training and musical education. "Maybe I really am out of my league here." Elena laughed, but not in a mean way. "Marcus, can I tell you something about James Morrison?" Marcus nodded. "He's technically perfect. He can play any piece flawlessly. He knows more music theory than most of the professors. But when he plays, it's like listening to a very expensive computer. There's no soul in his music. But he's right about the training and education," Marcus said. "I don't know anything about musical history or proper interpretation. Do you know what I heard when you played on Friday?" Elena asked. "I heard someone who understood the music from the inside. You didn't play the Chopin Ballade like you had studied it. You played it like you had lived it." Marcus felt a little better, but he was still uncertain. "Besides," Elena continued, "half the students here play perfectly and say nothing. You play with mistakes and say everything. Which do you think music is really about?" Before Marcus could answer, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the break room doorway. "Marcus, Director Petrov would like to see you in his office." Marcus's heart stopped. This was it. Either good news or bad news. Either way, the waiting would be over. Elena squeezed his shoulder as he stood up. "Remember what I said? You belong here as much as anyone." Marcus walked slowly to Director Petrov's office, his palms sweating and his mouth dry. The director's office was on the top floor of the conservatory, in a corner with large windows overlooking the city. Marcus had never been inside before. Mrs. Patterson knocked on the door and led Marcus inside. The office was impressive, with high ceilings, built-in bookshelves full of music scores, and a small grand piano in one corner. Awards and photographs covered the walls, showing Director Petrov with famous musicians from around the world. Director Petrov stood up from behind his large wooden desk as Marcus entered. He was wearing another expensive suit, and his gray hair was perfectly combed. But his expression was warmer than Marcus had expected. "Please sit down, Mr. Chen," the director said, gesturing to a chair in front of his desk. Marcus sat down carefully, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. I'll get straight to the point, Director Petrov said. Your audition on Friday was exceptional. The judges were unanimous in their decision. We would like to invite you to perform in our benefit concert. Marcus felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. He had hoped for this news, but hearing it actually spoken was overwhelming. Thank you, sir, he managed to say. I'm honored. The concert is in 6 weeks, Director Petrov continued. You'll be performing the same piece you played at the audition, the Chopin Ballade. You'll be sharing the stage with some of our most advanced students. I understand, sir. Director Petrov leaned back in his chair and studied Marcus carefully. I want you to know that this decision was not made lightly. Some people have questioned whether a community musician belongs on our concert stage. But music is not about where you come from or how you learned. It's about what you can express through sound. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. However, the director continued, I need to be honest with you about what you're facing. This concert is a major event for our conservatory. We'll have critics, donors, and other important people in attendance. The pressure will be much greater than what you experienced in the audition. I understand, sir. There will also be some people who hope you'll fail. People who think you don't belong here. Are you prepared for that? Marcus thought about James Morrison's words that morning, about the students who had whispered about him in the hallway, about all the challenges he would face in the coming weeks. I think so, sir, he said finally. Director Petrov smiled. Good, because I believe you have something special to offer. Your interpretation of the Chopin was fresh and honest in a way that formal training sometimes cannot teach. The director stood up and walked to the window. You know, Mr. Chen, I've been in the classical music world for over 30 years. I've heard thousands of performances by highly trained musicians. Most of them are competent, even excellent. But very few of them are memorable. He turned back to Marcus. Your performance on Friday was memorable. You made people feel something. In the end, that's what music is supposed to do. 6 weeks until the concert, Marcus felt the weight of that timeline every morning when he woke up and every night when he went to sleep. The excitement of being chosen was still there, but it was now mixed with a growing sense of pressure that seemed to increase each day. His first lesson with Professor Williams was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. Marcus had seen her around the conservatory many times, but they had never spoken. She was known as one of the most demanding teachers, but also one of the most effective. Her students regularly won competitions and earned spots in prestigious graduate programs. Wednesday arrived gray and drizzly. Marcus finished his cleaning duties early and changed into his good clothes in the staff bathroom. As he walked toward Professor Williams's studio, he passed several conservatory students in the hallway. Some nodded politely. Others whispered to each other and looked away. Professor Williams' studio was on the 3rd floor in a section of the building Marcus rarely cleaned. The hallway was quieter here, with thick carpeting that muffled sound. Each studio had a small window in the door, and Marcus could hear various instruments being practiced. As he walked past, he found Professor Williams's studio and knocked softly on the door. Come in, came a clear voice from inside. Marcus opened the door and stepped into a spacious room with 2 grand pianos, built-in shelves full of music, and large windows overlooking the campus courtyard. Professor Williams was a woman in her 50s with short silver hair and kind but sharp eyes. She was sitting at one of the pianos reviewing sheet music. You must be Marcus, she said, standing up and extending her hand. I'm Professor Williams. It's nice to meet you officially. Thank you for agreeing to work with me, Professor, Marcus said, shaking her hand. Please call me Margaret. We're going to be working closely together for the next 6 weeks. She gestured toward the piano bench. Shall we start by having you play through the ballade? I'd like to hear your current interpretation. Marcus sat down at the piano, suddenly nervous again. Playing for Professor Williams felt different than playing for an audition panel. This was more personal, more intimate. She would be listening carefully to every detail of his playing. He took a breath and began the opening of the Chopin Ballade. The familiar melody helped calm his nerves, and within a few measures Marcus was lost in the music again. He played through the entire piece, trying to perform it exactly as he had during the audition. When he finished, Professor Williams was quiet for a moment, taking notes on a pad of paper. That was lovely, Marcus, she said finally. You have a natural feel for the music that's quite remarkable. Your phrasing is intuitive, and your understanding of the piece's emotional structure is very sophisticated. Marcus felt relieved. Thank you. However, Professor Williams continued, there are some technical issues we need to address. Your hand position could be more efficient in the rapid passages, and there are some fingering choices that might work better for the demanding sections. She moved to the piano bench beside him. May I show you? For the next hour, Professor Williams worked with Marcus on specific technical details. She showed him how small changes in hand position could make difficult passages easier to play. She suggested different fingerings that would give him more control and consistency. She helped him understand how to use the piano's pedals more effectively. Marcus was amazed by how much these small changes improved his playing. Passages that had always felt awkward suddenly became more comfortable. Sections that had sometimes worked and sometimes not became more reliable. You're a quick learner, Professor Williams observed. Most students take weeks to incorporate these kinds of changes. You're adapting immediately. I've had to learn everything by trial and error, Marcus explained. I'm used to making adjustments. That's actually an advantage. Many students who have formal training from the beginning develop habits that are hard to change. You're still flexible in your approach. As the lesson continued, Marcus began to feel more confident. Professor Williams was demanding but encouraging. She pushed him to play better while also respecting his musical instincts. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Professor Williams said near the end of the lesson. The piano you'll be performing on for the concert. What about it? It's different from the one you auditioned on. Bigger, more powerful with a more sensitive touch. Some students find the adjustment challenging. Marcus felt a new worry creeping in. He had finally gotten comfortable with the audition piano, and now he would have to adapt to yet another instrument. We'll schedule some practice time for you on the concert piano, Professor Williams continued. But I want you to understand that every piano is different. Part of being a good performer is learning to adapt quickly to new instruments. After the lesson, Marcus walked back downstairs feeling both encouraged and overwhelmed. Professor Williams had given him so much information to work on. His head was spinning with new fingerings, technical suggestions, and practice strategies. As he passed the main bulletin board, Marcus noticed that a program for the benefit concert had been posted. His name was listed along with the conservatory students who would be performing. Seeing his name in print made the whole thing feel more real and more terrifying. That evening, Marcus practiced on his electric keyboard with new focus. He worked on the technical suggestions Professor Williams had given him, trying to adapt them to his smaller instrument. Some of the fingerings were impossible to practice properly without a full-size piano, but he did his best to understand the concepts. Sarah watched him practice with obvious pride. You look different when you play now, she told him. More confident, more professional. I feel different, Marcus admitted. Professor Williams taught me so much in just 1 hour. I can't imagine what I'll learn over the next 6 weeks. The following days fell into a new routine. Marcus would work his regular cleaning job during the day, then have lessons with Professor Williams 3 times a week. On the days without lessons, he would practice on one of the conservatory's pianos after hours, when the building was mostly empty. These evening practice sessions became Marcus's favorite time. The conservatory was quiet and peaceful after the students and faculty had gone home. Marcus could focus completely on the music without worrying about who might be listening or judging. During one of these evening sessions, Marcus was working on a particularly difficult passage when he heard footsteps in the hallway. A moment later, Elena appeared in the practice room doorway. Sorry to interrupt, she said. I forgot some music in one of the other practice rooms and heard you playing. It's okay, Marcus said. I was just working on some technical stuff. Elena listened as Marcus played through the section he had been practicing. That sounds much cleaner than when I heard you a few weeks ago. Professor Williams is helping you? She's amazing. I'm learning so much, Marcus paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I'm crazy for doing this? Everyone keeps telling me how difficult it's going to be, how much pressure there will be. Elena sat down in one of the chairs near the piano. Marcus, do you know why I really chose the violin? Marcus shook his head. It wasn't just because of that street musician I told you about. It was because when I heard him play, I realized that music could belong to anyone. It didn't matter that he didn't have an expensive instrument or formal training. What mattered was that he had something to say through music. She leaned forward. Most of the students here play beautifully, but they're all saying the same thing. They've been taught the correct way to interpret everything. You're saying something different, something personal. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I embarrass myself in the conservatory? Then you'll have tried something brave and meaningful. That's more than most people ever do. Elena stood up to leave. Besides, I heard Director Petrov talking to Professor Williams about your progress. He's very pleased with how you're developing. After Elena left, Marcus continued practicing with renewed determination. He thought about what she had said about having something personal to say through music. That was exactly what he felt when he played the Chopin Ballade. It was not just a technical exercise or a display of skill. It was a way of expressing emotions and experiences that he could not put into words. As the first week of preparation came to an end, Marcus felt like he was living in two different worlds. During the day, he was still the janitor, cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. Some people treated him the same as always. Others seemed uncertain about how to interact with him now that he was also a performer. But during his lessons and practice sessions, Marcus felt like he was becoming someone new. Not just a janitor who played piano as a hobby, but a serious musician preparing for an important performance. The transformation was not always comfortable. Marcus sometimes felt caught between these two identities, unsure of where he really belonged. But as he worked with Professor Williams and spent more time with the music, he began to understand that he did not have to choose between being a janitor and being a musician. He could be both. Friday of that first week brought another milestone. Professor Williams had arranged for Marcus to practice on the actual concert piano for the first time. The concert hall was much larger than the auditorium where he had auditioned. 3 weeks into his preparation, Marcus could feel himself changing in ways he had never expected. The lessons with Professor Williams were transforming not just his playing, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be a musician. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Marcus would finish his cleaning duties and transform from janitor to student. He would change clothes in the staff bathroom, walk up to Professor Williams' studio, and spend an intense hour working on every detail of the Chopin Ballade. Professor Williams was demanding in the best possible way. She noticed things about Marcus's playing that he had never considered. The way he moved his wrists, the angle of his fingers, the timing of his pedal changes. Each lesson revealed new layers of complexity in music that Marcus had thought he already understood well. "You're playing the notes correctly," Professor Williams told him during one particularly intense session, "but you're not yet playing the silences correctly." "The silences?" Marcus asked, confused. Professor Williams demonstrated at the piano. She played a phrase from the ballade, showing how the brief pauses between notes were just as important as the notes themselves. Music lives in the spaces between sounds as much as in the sounds themselves. The rests, the breathing spaces, the moments of anticipation, these are what make music feel alive. Marcus had never thought about silence as something that could be performed, but as Professor Williams guided him through the piece, he began to understand. The pauses were not just empty spaces. They were moments of tension, expectation, and emotional preparation for what came next. This was just one of dozens of revelations that came week after week. Marcus learned about the difference between playing loudly and playing with power. He discovered how small changes in timing could completely alter the emotional impact of a phrase. He began to understand how Chopin had built layers of meaning into every measure of the ballade. The technical improvements were dramatic. Passages that had been difficult and uncertain became secure and expressive. Marcus's hands were developing the strength and flexibility needed for the most demanding sections. His pedaling became more sophisticated, creating colors and textures he had never achieved before. But the most important changes were musical rather than technical. Under Professor Williams's guidance, Marcus was developing his own interpretation of the ballade. She never tried to impose her ideas on him. Instead, she helped him understand his own instincts and develop them more fully. "You have something to say with this piece," she told him repeatedly. "My job is not to change your message, but to help you communicate it more clearly." As Marcus's confidence grew, other people at the conservatory began to treat him differently. Students who had been skeptical or dismissive started showing genuine interest in his progress. Faculty members who had barely noticed him before would stop to ask how his preparation was going. Not everyone was supportive. James Morrison and his circle of friends continued to make cutting remarks whenever they encountered Marcus. They would discuss the upcoming concert in his presence, making pointed comments about maintaining standards and protecting the conservatory's reputation. But their opposition was beginning to feel less important to Marcus. He was gaining allies among students and faculty who appreciated what he was trying to accomplish. More importantly, he was gaining confidence in his own abilities and his right to be on that stage. The turning point came during his 4th week of preparation. Marcus was practicing alone one evening when he noticed someone watching from the practice room doorway. It was Dr. Harrison, the dean of the conservatory and Director Petrov's boss. Dr. Harrison was an intimidating figure, a tall, distinguished man who rarely spoke to anyone below the rank of full professor. Marcus had seen him at official events but had never been within 20 feet of him before. "Don't stop," Dr. Harrison said when Marcus paused his playing. "Please continue." Marcus felt his heart racing, but he returned to the Chopin ballade. Having the dean of the conservatory listening to his practice was terrifying, but Marcus tried to focus on the music rather than his audience. He played through a substantial section of the piece, including some of the most challenging passages. When he finished, Dr. Harrison walked into the practice room. "Remarkable," the dean said simply. "Professor Williams tells me you've never had formal piano instruction?" "That's correct, sir," Marcus replied, standing up from the piano bench. "Extraordinary. You've accomplished more in a few months than many students accomplish in years." Dr. Harrison studied Marcus carefully. "Are you nervous about the concert?" "Yes, sir. Very nervous." "Good. That means you understand the importance of what you're doing." Dr. Harrison moved toward the piano. "May I ask you something personal?" Marcus nodded. "Why is this so important to you? You have a steady job here. You could continue playing piano as a hobby without putting yourself through this pressure. What drives you to perform publicly?" Marcus had asked himself this question many times over the past month. "I think it's because music has given me so much, sir. It's made my life richer and more meaningful. If I can share that with other people, if I can show them that music belongs to everyone, then maybe I can give something back." Dr. Harrison smiled, the first time Marcus had ever seen him smile. "That's exactly the right answer. Music education can sometimes become too focused on technical perfection and professional advancement. We forget that music's real purpose is to touch people's hearts and bring communities together." The dean walked toward the door, then turned back. "I'll be in the audience for your performance, Mr. Chen. I'm looking forward to it." After Dr. Harrison left, Marcus sat alone in the practice room, overwhelmed by what had just happened. The dean of the conservatory, one of the most important people in the classical music world, had listened to his playing and approved. More than that, he had understood why Marcus was doing this. The remaining weeks of preparation passed quickly. Marcus's lessons with Professor Williams became more focused on performance preparation than technical improvement. They worked on managing stage nerves, adapting to different acoustic environments, and recovering from mistakes during performance. "Every performer makes mistakes," Professor Williams told him during one of their final lessons. "The difference between amateur and professional performers is not that professionals don't make mistakes. It's that they know how to keep going when mistakes happen." She taught Marcus techniques for staying focused during performance, even when things went wrong, how to breathe properly to manage anxiety, how to use the acoustics of the concert hall to his advantage, how to connect with the audience through his playing. "Remember," she said, "you're not just playing for the critics and donors in the audience. You're playing for everyone who has ever felt that music was beyond their reach. You're proving that passion and dedication can take someone anywhere." As the concert date approached, Marcus found himself becoming a minor celebrity at the conservatory. Local newspapers had picked up the story of the self-taught janitor who would be performing alongside conservatory students. A classical music blog had written an article about him. People he had never met would stop him in the hallways to wish him luck. The attention was both flattering and overwhelming. Marcus had never expected his story to generate so much interest. All he had wanted was a chance to share his love of music. Now he found himself representing something larger, the idea that classical music could be accessible to anyone willing to work for it. 1 week before the concert, Marcus had his final practice session on the concert hall piano. Professor Williams sat in the audience as he played through the entire ballade without stopping. When he finished, the hall was silent for a long moment. "That was beautiful, Marcus," Professor Williams said finally. "You're ready. Marcus felt a mixture of pride and terror. Ready or not, the concert was coming. In 1 week, he would walk onto that stage in front of 300 people and play the music that had become such an important part of his life. The final week passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Marcus continued his regular work schedule, but everyone at the conservatory knew that his mind was focused on Saturday night. Students and faculty wished him luck. Mrs. Patterson decorated his janitor's cart with a small good luck sign. Even some of the students who had been skeptical began to show support. Marcus overheard conversations where students were defending him against critics. "You should hear him play," one student told another. "He's actually really good." James Morrison remained hostile to the end. On Friday, the day before the concert, he cornered Marcus in the hallway one final time. "I hope you know what you're doing tomorrow night," James said. "A lot of important people will be watching. If you embarrass the conservatory, it will reflect badly on all of us." But James's words no longer had the power to shake Marcus's confidence. Too many other people believed in him now. More importantly, Marcus believed in himself. "I'll do my best," Marcus replied calmly. "That's all anyone can do." Friday evening, Marcus had a quiet dinner at home with Sarah. They barely talked about the concert. Both of them knew that everything that could be said had been said. Tomorrow would speak for itself. "Are you scared?" Sarah asked as they cleaned up the dishes. Saturday arrived bright and clear. Marcus woke up feeling surprisingly calm. After weeks of anxiety and preparation, the day of the concert felt almost peaceful. There was nothing left to do but perform. Sarah made a special breakfast, but Marcus could only eat a few bites. His stomach was too tight with anticipation. They spent the morning quietly, walking in the park near their apartment and talking about everything except the concert. "What time do you need to be there?" Sarah asked as they walked back home. 4 o'clock for the final rehearsal. "The concert starts at 7. I'll be in the front row," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "Right where you can see me." At 3:30, Marcus put on his best suit. Sarah had bought him a new tie for the occasion, deep blue with a subtle pattern. As he looked at himself in the mirror, Marcus barely recognized the person staring back. He looked like a professional musician preparing for an important performance. The walk to the conservatory felt different than usual. Instead of entering through the staff entrance as he had done thousands of times before, Marcus walked through the main entrance like a performer. Students and faculty members who were arriving early for the concert smiled and waved at him. The concert hall was bustling with activity. Other performers were warming up on practice pianos. Stage crew members were adjusting lights and microphones. The energy was electric with anticipation. Marcus found Professor Williams backstage. She was dressed elegantly for the concert and looked as nervous as he felt. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Ready," Marcus said, and he meant it. "Good. Remember everything we've worked on, but most importantly, remember why you're here. You have something beautiful to share with these people." The final rehearsal was brief, just a chance for each performer to test the acoustics and get comfortable on stage one more time. When Marcus's turn came, he walked out to the concert grand piano and sat down at the bench he had come to know so well. The hall was mostly empty, except for a few crew members and other performers. Marcus played through just the opening section of the ballade, testing the sound and his own comfort level. The piano responded perfectly, and Marcus felt his confidence solidify. As 6 o'clock approached, the performers gathered in a backstage area to wait. Marcus could hear the audience arriving in the concert hall. Voices, laughter, the rustle of programs, and the scraping of chairs. By 6:30, the hall was full. Marcus peeked through a crack in the backstage curtain and saw the audience. 300 people filled every seat. In the front row, he spotted Sarah, wearing her favorite dress and beaming with pride. Near the middle, he saw Director Petrov and Dean Harrison, both looking serious and attentive. In the back, he noticed several people with notebooks, probably music critics from local newspapers. "Ladies and gentlemen," the stage manager announced, 5 minutes to curtain. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but it was excitement more than fear. All those weeks of preparation had led to this moment. In a few minutes, he would step onto that stage and share the music that had become such an important part of his life. The concert began with a young violinist performing a piece by Bach. She played beautifully, and the audience responded with warm applause. Next came a soprano singing an aria from an opera Marcus didn't recognize. Then a cellist, then a flutist. Each performance was excellent. These conservatory students represented years of training and natural talent. Marcus watched from backstage, admiring their skill and trying not to think about following such polished performances. Marcus Chen, the stage manager, called softly. "You're next." Marcus walked to the edge of the stage and waited for his introduction. Through the curtain, he could hear Director Petrov speaking to the audience. "Our next performer represents something special about music," the director was saying. "Marcus Chen is a member of our conservatory staff who discovered his love of classical piano through his daily exposure to our students practicing. He is entirely self-taught, and his interpretation of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor reminds us that music belongs to everyone who approaches it with passion and dedication." The audience applauded as Marcus walked onto the stage. Under the bright lights, the concert hall looked even larger than he remembered. Every seat was filled and every face was turned toward him. For a moment, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the attention. Then he saw Sarah in the front row, smiling encouragingly. He saw Elena a few rows back, giving him a thumbs up. He even saw some of his fellow custodial staff members who had bought tickets to support him. Marcus sat down at the piano bench and adjusted it to the perfect height. He placed his hands on the keys and felt their familiar weight. The hall became completely silent. 300 people were waiting to hear what he had to say through music. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The years of listening to students practice while he cleaned. The hours spent learning on his electric keyboard. The lessons with Professor Williams. The transformation from someone who loved music to someone who could share that love with others. He took a deep breath and began to play. The opening notes of the Chopin Ballade filled the concert hall with their gentle, questioning melody. Marcus felt the piano respond to his touch exactly as it had during his practice sessions. Every technical improvement he had made, every musical insight he had gained, every ounce of preparation he had done, it all came together in those first few measures. As the piece developed, Marcus felt something magical happening. The audience disappeared from his consciousness. The pressure and expectations faded away. There was only Marcus and the piano and Chopin's beautiful music. The first theme unfolded with the grace and elegance Marcus had worked so hard to achieve. His technique was secure and confident. But more importantly, his interpretation was deeply personal and moving. He was not just playing the notes correctly. He was telling a story that came from his heart. As the piece moved into its more dramatic sections, Marcus felt the full power of the concert grand piano. The sound filled every corner of the hall with rich, powerful tones. In the audience, people were leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed in the performance. The technical passages that had once seemed impossible flowed effortlessly under Marcus's fingers. Months of careful practice with Professor Williams had given him the tools he needed to handle Chopin's most demanding writing. But the technique served the music, not the other way around. When Marcus reached the climactic section of the ballade, he played with an intensity and passion that surprised even himself. This was the moment he had been preparing for. Not just the technical climax of the piece, but the emotional peak of his entire musical journey. The final section of the ballade brought a sense of resolution and peace. Marcus played these concluding measures with the wisdom and maturity he had gained through his months of preparation. The music seemed to say that the struggle had been worthwhile, that the dream had been achieved. As the last notes faded into silence, Marcus sat quietly at the piano for a moment. The concert hall was completely still. Then slowly the applause began. It started with Sarah, who was on her feet immediately. Then Elena and the other supportive students joined in. Within seconds, the entire audience was standing and applauding. The ovation continued for what felt like forever. Marcus stood up from the piano bench and bowed to the audience. The applause grew even louder. In the front rows, he could see tears in people's eyes. Director Petrov was clapping enthusiastically. Even Dean Harrison was on his feet, applauding with obvious appreciation. From the back of the hall, Marcus heard someone shout, "Bravo!" Then others joined in. The audience was not just being polite. They were genuinely moved by what they had heard. As Marcus walked off stage, Professor Williams was waiting in the wings with tears streaming down her face. "That was extraordinary," she said, hugging him tightly. "You played better than I've ever heard you play." Other performers backstage congratulated Marcus as he passed by. Even some of the conservatory students who had been skeptical were now offering genuine praise. The rest of the concert continued, but Marcus barely heard it. He was still processing what had just happened. He had done it. He had performed Chopin's Ballade in front of 300 people, and they had loved it. After the concert ended, Marcus was surrounded by well-wishers in the lobby. Audience members who had never met him came up to congratulate him and share how his performance had moved them. Several people asked if he was planning to give more concerts. Director Petrov found Marcus in the crowd and pulled him aside. "That was one of the most beautiful performances I've heard in my 30 years at this conservatory," the director said. "You didn't just play the music, you made it your own." "Thank you, sir. I couldn't have done it without Professor Williams and everyone else who supported me." "Marcus, I want to discuss something with you next week. We have a scholarship program for exceptional adult learners. I think you should consider applying to study music here formally." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. You've proven that you have both the talent and the dedication to succeed at the highest level. Why should your musical education stop here?" As the crowd in the lobby began to thin out, Marcus finally found Sarah. She ran to him and threw her arms around him.